my background is really around film and television, so this was kind of, I'm really passionate about this area of work, and what I was hoping to do with this presentation is kind of talk you through particularly my journey into interactive storytelling, that kind of feeds the later case studies I wanted to talk about, and then talk through some different case studies that I've worked on across the last kind of 7 or 8 years. And just in terms of, because interactive storytelling can mean a whole heap of different things, and I sat in on a fascinating session before that was talking about the nuts and bolts of interactive storytelling from a coding perspective, so I thought probably useful to kind of give you the sense of where I'm coming at it from, which is twofold. So in terms of being the makers of the content and the storyteller, I sort of crudely, my take around how I talk about interactive storytelling is just the art of storytelling enhanced with technology, which can mean a whole raft of different things. And I often also like to think of it from the sense of what the viewer's experiences or the audience experiences. And you can hear interchangeably often used as transmedia, multi-platform, cross-platform, interactive storytelling. And I think when I look at it and I get this definition of the audience, which is often how I'm thinking, this does feel like the purest kind of transmedia sense, where there's always that element of discovery and coming into a story in a certain way. And then as an individual, there's this sense of participatory, kind of the nature of it, where you're often collecting or connecting things. And if you're following that kind of true Jeff Gomez sense of transmedia, you're enabling architecture for dialogue. So you're often allowing people to be able to create content themselves, which then builds out into this richer story world. So this is the sort of way in which I'm framing interactive storytelling and how I'll talk to it. And there's this fantastic talk by Shane Smith, it was about a year ago in a Taggart lecture, and it's worth listening to. It's about an hour long, and he's clearly drunk at the beginning of it, so you can skip the first kind of 7 minutes. But it's a real rally cry, and I often go back to it because I just love the way he talks about the generations coming up and how they care about media, and actually they're often disregarded in terms of how engaged and how much they care, how diverse they are in every sense of the word. And I think when I'm banging on, particularly at TVNZ, because I should have added that I'm working at TVNZ as a commissioner for digital and children's content, I often get kind of a pushback as to why we're doing this kind of stuff around interactive. It's not reaching the broadest audiences, it's not driving a huge amount of ad revenue. And I keep trying to say, I think the whole point is that if you think like an audience member, and if they love content and they care about it, then interactive storytelling and enabling them to do more with the content they love is just a golden place to be in, and it can yield in terms of finding ways to commercialise it and monetise it if that's your bag. So I'm always kind of like banging on about Shane Smith. I think it's really fascinating, and I think what Vice is doing is brilliant. And so this was my first experience of interactive storytelling, VR as it was back then. And I think it was Scooby-Doo was one of the first stories that I came across, and I just remember that feeling of kind of the power I had flipping through the moments, which wasn't any different to turning the page of a book, but suddenly that sense of immersion that I personally had never come across before, and then obviously didn't feel again until I put on an Oculus Rift years later. And then the next sort of feeling of this, like, what is this kind of thing? And it was Gigabyte, which again, completely analog, but as an audience member, you know, I had agency, so suddenly I was making decisions based on the story that I was interested in, get to the end of the book, and it was like, shit, I can do the whole thing again and have a different experience, and realising that others could do the same thing. So that was that sort of gear shift, I think, in terms of what I'd understood storytelling to be before that. And then Miss came along, obviously, and you all know it, but just that, again, that moment of you were suddenly planted in a story, transported into a world that had sub-worlds or ages, and then you were what felt like completely free roam. So suddenly you were moving around, but you were collecting clues. Those clues would give a backstory, and from memory there were 3 different ways, weren't there, that you could experience the ending. So again, that sense of a branching narrative or being able to experience something differently, no different to pick a path, but obviously with different technologies. You could start, I sort of personally had this sense of it evolving. And then over the course, I think, of the next kind of like 10 years, sort of early 2000s, I just started to see it everywhere. Film and television, always with games, obviously. Games have been doing it for the longest amount of time. Halo 2, remember thinking that campaign, I Love These, I think it was around 2004, was just incredible. So you had the trailer that played for the upcoming game, and at the end was the URL that said I Love These. you go to it and it looked like it was a Bee Enthusiast website. Turns out it was all part of the campaign, and then AI had landed in the server and was hacking it, and you were basically given codes that then geotagged to payphones around the UK, where you could receive calls at certain times. They had voice artists on the other end of the line that would then give you backstories for the game, Easter eggs for the upcoming game, incredibly intricate, and feeding a kind of layer of the superfan that sort of sat there. And then you'd start to see it more and more, Blair Witch did it really beautifully with their marketing campaign. So I could sort of see it all happening around me. And then I landed a job at a digital agency in London, based out of Liverpool and London, called Tokyo Digital. And they got shoulder tapped by a video production company called Big Balls. And Big Balls had been hired by Capcom, who bought the IP for Remember Me, which was a game made by the studio Don't Nod. And it was a gift of a transmedia or interactive storytelling project, because the creators of the game had envisaged an entire backstory that they wanted to create. So what we did for them is we built an interactive journal. What the game designers had seen was that they wanted to create this world that was almost 6 chapters or 6 parts. And they talked about wanting the journal to be part 1 to 5, and then when the game launched itself, that would be the part 6 of the story. So they pitched it in, and then went off to Paris with some sci-fi writers, and then wrote this entire kind of prequel, a century leading up to when the game launches, which is set in the future in 2084, based around the creator of the technology that features in the game. So back when we built this site, it was all optimised for tablet, but it was all web-based. And this was a kind of foray into, and my first project actually working on non-linear storytelling, but trying to tell it in both linear and non-linear ways. So you can see that there's a chronology. What happens is that there's a guy, Anton Cartier-Wells, who comes up with the technology sensing that he's a genius coder. So it tracks from his birth, basically, moves along 5 chapters of his life where he creates this technology. He suffers the tragic loss of a loved one, and it kind of warps him. Then his technology gets co-opted. So what he had anticipated would be a technology that would allow him to archive memory, so it could be forever kept. Gets co-opted by awful evil capitalists, and then they start to use it to supplant memories into people's brains, so they believe they've done things, and at the same time the whole world is becoming kind of apocalyptic and falling apart. So you could skip through the different chapters of his life. It's all narrative driven, so all of this is just about filling in a backstory for him so that you get to the end of it and you're ready to launch into the game. So as we got to the latter stages of the century's chronology, we'd start to introduce more of the actual game art, so that again we were sort of mapping from real world into what would be the sort of the design and style of the game world. All of this was obviously just promotional hype. So this was actually built completely to lead up to the launch of the game itself. So you can I sort of started to realise, wow, that people are actually willing to invest in this level of engagement with their fans because they think this will feed and then obviously get them to go on and pay for the product itself. And then off the back of that project, Tokyo Digital got shoulder tapped by an organisation that's actually now defunct. It was called the Digital Fiction Factory, and it was based out of Manchester, funded by, from memory, it was funded by BBC and Creative England. And it had been set up, just as a side point, I think, as an apology to the north of England, because all of the film, television, game development work was basically coming through London, and nothing was sort of kind of going out further into the north of England. So, and it was such a cool setup. Interestingly, I think the fact it didn't work went back a lot to kind of agreements around rights and IP, which I can talk to a little bit, and it's not existing anymore, but the whole premise of it was anytime BBC, Channel 4, any of the big broadcasters had a new film or a new television project that they'd greenlit to go into development, they basically pulled this roster of creative agencies together, and it was everything from digital agencies, immersive theatre companies, animation studios, game development studios. You were all invited into the room, and then the writers and directors would pitch in their stories, sometimes even at a kind of bare bones stage where they didn't have the endings decided yet. They'd stand up and they'd say, here's my idea. and then you as the agency would go away, put in a proposal for what you thought would be a really great multi-platform campaign to launch that product. 3 agencies per project were given £10,000 to develop a proof of concept, which could be anything you wanted it to be. It could be you could build a prototype of the game, if that was the idea you had. You could spend it all on wireframes and design to make a short film. And so we went through that process and pitched in for a film, which was going to be a first-time feature film by this woman, Faye Gilbert, a really amazing woman, and she'd done quite a few critically acclaimed short films that were really powerful. Her bag was she was really interested in youth. So she would go into the prisons and work with youth offenders and try and find ways for them to tell their stories, and she was really sold on this idea of how do we empower young people to be able to tell their stories and how do we destigmatise what it means to be a youth offender. And so her film was actually not too dissimilar to the idea of The Tribe, where an apocalypse has happened and it's seemingly only children have been the ones to survive, and they come together in these groups, and then slowly evil characters will start to come in, and they're always the adults in the story. And there was a central protagonist, this really fantastic female lead, and she ends up having to do a face-off with her dad, who ends up being one of the completely evil cronies, and the whole kind of central moral kind of crux of the film is, would you sort of sacrifice yourself almost to save the people you care about or your family, and what does that look like? So we pitched in and won. Interestingly, this never got greenlit. It's never seen the light of day. We spent 9 months putting together an entire multi-platform campaign around it, and I'm going to show you one of the videos we made that went in as the final sort of, as part of that 10,000 funding that we got. So it's all just sitting in a vault somewhere in Channel 4 because the project itself never got greenlit. But the process we went through and the way we worked with Faye Gilbert was the part that really fascinated me, because as we would be coming up with ideas, and you'll see when I show you the video, we've got this idea around symbols. She loved that idea, so she started writing it into her script. So it just kind of plopped for me that it was like, that's where you could see what that whole idea of transmedia or interactive storytelling was if you could get in very early at the inception of the project. So I'll just play you, it's only about 2 minutes, but it shows you what we were intending to do as the whole piece around the campaign.
Stories are the most important thing in the world. Without stories, we wouldn't be human beings at all. Towers is a story of love, betrayal, hope and survival in a post-apocalyptic world. It's a story of courage and the strength of us young ones to survive in a world where our parents no longer protect us. So we protect each other. Towers is an unforgettable multi-platform storytelling experience that takes people on a journey. Our audience discover questions in the real world and the film's world that lead them online, where they explore and share stories with others about what it means to be alive. But let's take a step back, shall we? Online storytelling is at the heart of Towers, but the film is yet to launch and we need to build a captive audience. So Towers is born on the streets, where our storytelling begins. Our characters find a life on the forgotten walls and brickwork of the city, and tower symbols and questions appear on lampposts and buildings overnight, causing people to stop and wonder. Every day for a month, before the film launches, we release a new Towers story, question and symbol into the real world. Each story tells us about our characters, so people begin to learn about Kira and Adam before they even realise they're characters in a film. Each question challenges people. Would you sacrifice yourself to save your family? Could you live in fear for the rest of your life? So each piece of Towers planted in the real world draws people online, where they discover answers to the questions and share anonymous stories about their lives. Fans return to Facebook each day for the Towers Symbols competition, piecing them together to unlock a Towers mystery and earning rewards in the lead up to the film. The film launches across the UK. Audiences watch entranced as characters and symbols appear on screen that they recognise. Afterwards, people explore the Towers website, where they discover new stories each day, where they share their own stories. They filter stories by themes from the film, themes like love, hope, friendship and survival. Each story shared builds a legacy of human emotion. And so it is that the world of Towers lives on, just as the characters of Towers found a way to survive.
What was really interesting to me, I think, is that ultimately there was a lot of money going into these projects and the development of them, but I think then the investment wasn't necessarily paying off, or it felt that the risks were too high to be launching new projects with a full kind of multi-platform campaign rather than when they didn't already have an audience there. And I think also you sort of look at that now and it's so clear how, how many years ago it was, now you would have been looking at much different ways to engage with young people around different platforms, so it moves incredibly fast. And then I headed back to New Zealand and joined NZGDC17, and it was a brave new world. I had no idea how broadcasting worked and what that looked like, and was trying to pitch in all this multi-platform work as an external agency, and it was like, we're not pitching any of that, you need to come in to try and do any of this type of work. So that's sort of the journey. This slide is really just to say that we're doing a lot of research ourselves at the moment to try and understand who our audiences are, because everything's changing so fast, and obviously TV is right at the forefront of that kind of precipice of what's going to happen with it unless we innovate, which we're fast trying to do. So we're now trying to stream all our channels and content online to sort of acknowledge that shifting behaviour. But we recently did some qual research. We went out, and there's a small number of families that we actually put cameras in their homes consensually and filmed their behaviours in the living room around the television and what they were doing. What's come out that's been very interesting is this one around the TV is the companion, where the opportunities are for multi-screening, and that actually 85% of New Zealanders are doing that. So they've got devices in hand as they're watching TV. And what's that relationship look like in terms of trying to do interactive storytelling with television content? And we've done a few different projects. I'm going to talk through some case studies. These definitions, I think, have been used interchangeably as well. I'm talking about them in terms of meshing being an activation that you created, an app, a game, whatever that looks like, that syncs live with whatever you're watching on the screen in front of you. Stacking in this regard, I'm talking about something where you've acknowledged that you actually want people's attention to be on the story that's being told on the screen, but how could you create an experience that sits alongside that so that you're almost extending out people's ability to interact with the content. And then in terms of bridging, this is very specifically we've used it for Shortland Street, but also for whenever you've got a hiatus between seasons, and you'll see it a lot with some of the big shows like Narcos and ones like that, where the story creators obviously want to keep audiences engaged in the year that there's like a gap between shows, so that's what we're talking about when we're talking about bridging. So this one around meshing, we did this for My Kitchen Rules a few years back, and we did it with Resin, who's a digital agency in Wellington. It was an incredibly simple web app that let you live vote along with the show. The making of it was incredibly complex because there were 50 episodes, and what we were doing was we were time coding everything so that as you were watching the show, as the teams or the couples were cooking their entrees, they would, you'd be able to vote on that. The minute it switched to them cooking their mains on screen, suddenly you're into the main section, and you could interact with it that way. And then live on air at the end would be a pop-up on screen that showed what New Zealanders' votes were. So you sort of sensed you were part of a community who was engaging with the show and interacting with it. We had some fantastic results. So across the course of the series, we had 1.2 million page views of using the web app. Things like, yada yada, competition entries, but things like 12 minutes per visit was really intriguing to me because it showed that people were keeping their device open and next to them and engaging with it, because ultimately the voting took all of a couple of seconds. So there was something there about the behaviour of people wanting to keep their devices there and keep them engaged, which sort of struck us as really interesting. And then a report came out, I think it was 2014, by Nielsen that was then looking at multi-screening, and they'd sort of suggested that actually where there's a bigger potential might be around ensuring that you're not trying to do a simultaneous connection, but you're actually trying to build out a presence across different screens to amplify your content. Because you can see how for something like My Kitchen Rules, it's quite light, and you're able to just play along with it, but actually there might be a requirement where something might be more narrative rich, that you were allowing people to just do that and focus and give them something else. And so the example for this was one we did for a reality home renovation show, one of 5 million on TV1. But this one actually, at its heart, whether or not that's how it was sort of translated on screen, this had a real social commentary at its heart, which was that where previously generations grew up knowing they could get a home relative, even on sort of not necessarily flashy salaries, you could buy a home and have your own home. Now it was just not a reality for the largest chunk of New Zealand. And this was about talking about how parents would have to put skin in the game to help their kids do up a house together. They were stuck in the house living together. That's where the drama came from. And then the idea was that kids sell the house, money that's made from it goes towards their first home. So I'll play you a brief promo of the show so you get a sense of what the show was trying to do, and then I'll talk about how we worked with in-game to build a native iOS Android, and actually we had a Unity version for web, sort of simulation of the show.
Are you ready?
We're freaking out a little bit on the inside.
3 families are taking on the property market, living under the same roof.
Living with my parents again isn't going to be easy, I don't think.
And I haven't had the honour yet.
They'll have to buy,
It's going to auction in an hour.
renovate,
Have we got time?
Yeah, what do you think?
and survive.
Oh my God, there's a hell of a lot to go wrong.
Our First Home starts Sunday 7:30 on 1.
So that was the show. And then the game that we built, again, was actually quite intricate in the way that we wanted to map it and create it. So the idea was that you yourself could then go in and you'd have the opportunity to renovate your own virtual homes, sell them, try and make the most profit that you could. And wherever possible, we were weaving and integrating the show into the game. So you saw it with the families in there. You saw it particularly, and interestingly, and it was how we got this whole game across the line, you saw it with the commercial partners. So the idea was that you can kind of see how you go into the homes, and the 3 sponsors were Flybuys, Toyota, BNZ. So Flybuys is really obvious. You could recreate the loyalty scheme of Flybuys within the game itself. Flybuys' core goal with wanting to sponsor the show was New Zealanders aren't using their Flybuys points out. They either don't know or they need to be reminded to do it. Can we create a mechanic that would actually emulate what you do with the product itself and get people to spend their Flybuys points? So you could get fancier wallpaper if you accrued fewer points, etc. With Toyota, it was really obvious. They just wanted people to understand their range of products in their cars and what it would mean for families of 4 versus an individual couple who was sporty. So again, you were matching the right cars with the right properties that you were buying, all pretty straightforward. And BNZ had a financial advisor in the show, so within the game itself, the same talent would appear and give you advice and talk you through how to best do up your property and sell it. So kind of really pragmatic. This had really fantastic stats as well, which I'll show when I get to the end, but engagement of like 24 minutes of people on average playing the game. So again, this was happening after the television show, so it's that sense of amplifying the content out across different platforms. And one of the key pieces for us, and it's been quite an interesting learning curve for me, is utilising TV as a platform for promotion. So I'll show you a very brief, I think it's 5 or 10 second promo that advertised the game. The show itself was stripped across 3 nights, so each night we'd play an ad towards the end of the show that would promote the game. The idea being that people would end the show and then want to go on and play the game because they wanted to keep engaging with the Our First Home world.
A knack for renovating and selling homes? Then get playing the Our First Home game, where you can renovate and sell virtual houses for the chance to win up to $6,000 worth of prizes.
It was so exciting.
Go to ourfirsthome.co.nz to play or download from the App Store.
And I was trying to dig up the graph, because this is a few years ago now, but you could see these spikes, these massive spikes of people going immediately to the App Store or jumping directly into the game. So you could actually see the direct correlation of, for obvious reasons, but of people picking it up, which is sort of, again, set a precedent for how we do some of these campaigns moving forward to make sure we're making the most of that megaphone, which does still exist. And so for New Zealand, these numbers got really strong. You get 26,000 downloads, and this was year 1, and I think it went on to do year 2. So I think all of these numbers are probably old now. 76% returning users, and 27-minute session duration. So almost like a whole other half-hour program, if you like, people engaging with the content, engaging with the commercial branding. So again, that yield on partners feeling like they're getting exposure and be willing to put money in, because partly some of the funding from those sponsors obviously meant to making a game itself. And then the bridging approach that I referenced earlier, this was the first project I worked on for TVNZ, so it's quite old now, but it's been my favourite, I think. And it was for the hiatus. So every year, Shortland Street goes off air for 5 weeks to give the crew and cast their sanity back. And it ends always with a very big cliffhanger in December, then comes back on air usually around mid-January. And this year particularly was the most dramatic cliffhanger that Ferndale had ever seen, where you had Josh, who's in the black and white there, had a hero complex, and he had set a bomb intending to defuse the bomb and save the day, got waylaid, the bomb went off, and it was at Chris Warner's batch when they were having a Christmas party. So sort of 9 Shortland Street stars fell into this burning inferno, and it was a whole, who'll live, who'll die. And South Pacific Pictures were fantastic because they, and they're the production company that was on the street, they allowed us to actually reveal survivors across the kind of 3 or 4 weeks in summer when the show was off air. So the idea was that you kept fans talking and engaged with the story to then drive back into the return in mid-Jan. The sort of nuance of trying to write for that and not reveal too much was that you couldn't schism the story world, and you had to enable it so that people who didn't follow along during the summer break still didn't feel excluded from it. So the whole story had to hinge and work. So we did a lot of mapping to get that right. And this went on to win gold in New York at one of the Promax Awards up against some massive kind of multi-platform pieces by Comedy Central, and I think there was a Hannibal act as well. And I think the reason why it punched above its weight, this kind of little project from New Zealand, was just that so much love and attention was given to what the fans cared about and what the story meant to them and how we teased that out. So I'll play you the case study, and you'll also see the lens across it in terms of what it meant for the linear program and why it was an important marketing piece.
TV2's Weeknight Soap gets an average 45% yearly share of the 18 to 49 demo.
I'm so sorry to disappoint.
We were asked to deliver fans their daily fix while it was off air for its 5-week summer break. When the last episode ended with a cliffhanger and 6 lead characters possibly dead, a promo went to air to ignite our viewers' speculation as to who was killed. A transmedia clue hunt launched via a responsive website and through social invited our audience to unravel the mystery. A new clue was seeded daily in the form of media coverage, text messages between characters, videos, anagrams, voice calls, emails, and police evidence. One real-world clue even had fans searching that week's TV Guide magazine. The online conversation grew with the re-release of the on-air promo with slightly different imagery. At this point, nearly 60,000 people visited the site that day. Fans were rewarded with exclusive reveals of the surviving characters. An average dwell time of 4.5 minutes per visit confirmed the site's depth, stickiness demonstrated by 17,000 fans returning on a daily basis, with a massive 600,000 visits to the site over 34 days and over 3 million page views. The new season launch after the final clue brought a massive 53.5% share to the first episode.
So there were 3 things that I personally took from that. One was the link that you could actually make between driving and on air from the screens, which sort of hadn't, I don't think, particularly internally within TVNZ, people had felt that there was all that much power around it. The second thing was you can kind of do anything with Shortland Street because the fans are crazy. And so we've actually made sure that we didn't lose sight. This is an anomaly. Shortland Street's always going to be an anomaly because it's been around for 25 years and people are obsessed with it. But isn't that amazing? So actually we should deliver to that fandom. So it's shaped how we've done future campaigns and we'll continue to do them for Shortland Street. And the last one was actually kind of poor time management on our side that yielded learnings, which was that actually we were doing everything so fast that we'd only had, say, 10 clues prepped at the time of launch. but we started to see how people were logging in at like midnight on the dot. We'd do clues where you'd have like an audio clue that we'd have messed up and switched around and kind of clouded over, and someone at 2 a.m. would have ripped it down, flipped it, cleaned it up and posted the transcript for fans. So we were like, fuck. So we started rewriting all the clues to hide like 5 extra Easter egg clues within things. But that was amazing because suddenly I realised, okay, well actually, if you are willing to do a structure for your campaign or whatever you're trying to achieve, but you leave flexibility to see how people are engaging with it, what they're trying to do, you can do so much more with it if you allow yourself that space, which is not technically how it at all intended to work. And then just this is my last case study to talk to, and it's not really a pure interactive storytelling case study, but it's a really, really brilliant project I worked on for a year in London for Saatchi & Saatchi when I was over there 2015 across 2016. And it's gone on to be massively successful. It's won about 9 Cannes Lions for effectiveness across the board. And it's just a really beautiful case study, and it does have an element of storytelling that I wanted to talk to, which is kind of interesting. But in essence, Deutsche Telekom, who's a telecommunications company that are across Europe, they came to Saatchi, who was the agency, and they said, we want to be doing something good for humanity, and we want to do it in the intersection of health and technology. So using our strength of our network and what we do as a company. So we went and talked to some ferociously smart scientists at University College of London and said to them, we've got this opportunity, and what would be a condition or an area of health that we should look at? And they just immediately said dementia. So they said, so anecdotally, dementia is about 10 years behind cancer in terms of people's awareness of it, in terms of effectiveness of treatments and research. There's a dearth of research and we need to do more. So we had that area and we were like, great. We felt like it was going to be an important space. We didn't yet know what that was going to look like. And as we sat with the scientists and started talking to them, these very interesting learnings kind of came to the fore, which was that as many people know, early signs of dementia or Alzheimer's is quite specific types of memory loss and disorientation. But where the scientists were struggling with that, it's very hard to distinguish between what's normal in terms of disorientation and memory loss for healthy aging versus as a sign of early onset dementia or Alzheimer's. And so what they were asking was, we need to understand what normal looks like in terms of baselining spatial navigation. And so we want to create a mass market game that in essence will be around navigation to create a huge database of data that then we could start to use in clinical trial tests. So as it stands, or did stand, like the way they would run these experiments would be very, very cumbersome. So they'd promote coming to do a clinical trial. It'd often be flyers, you rip off a number, you turn up to these places to get the experiments or trials done where you would be doing navigation awareness, and then they'd pay you £10 a head was kind of on average. So it took a huge amount of time, and they wanted to kind of revolutionise what that looked like. So I've got the case study which will give you the whole sense of the project, and then I'll just talk a little bit about the process of the actual game development, because of course it's really tricky when you are trying to create a game that's sticky, that will appeal to a mass market, but it's a health-based game, and that was a really interesting journey.
You lead a normal life, and then something changes. Everything that makes that person a person is stripped away.
No one's ever survived dementia. There are no treatments that tackle the disease itself. We need to understand more about the condition. We need to understand how we can treat this disease. We know that research holds the key, and for the research to be able to take place, we need data which doesn't exist.
Last year, nearly 3 million people played Sea Hero Quest, the first mobile game to help scientists fight dementia.
We realized we could help scientists get the data they need to further their research by connecting to those already using our technology.
As you move around, your position gets relayed back to the scientists, and they can see it like a heat map. And that data is used to try and understand on a mass scale how people are navigating around these different mazes.
Many of the dementia patients get lost. There's a very important symptom which so far has been really very little investigated. The data from the game creates a global benchmark of spatial navigation in humans.
Now Deutsche Telekom are launching the game in virtual reality to take it to the next level.
It's the next technological innovation that will not only make the game even more fun, but will help to gather even deeper insights into dementia.
Through VR, we are able to replicate highly credible lab-based navigation experiments, and the intuitive nature of VR means we can widen the study to a much broader audience.
More accurate data, more detailed experiments, and more nautical fun.
You probably have this mindset, game and technology, and kids gonna hate it.
Once you get the hang of it, it's great. Number 2's over there.
By playing this game, they're helping being part of the solution. They're helping us be that little bit nearer to finding those treatments and understanding how we can better diagnose dementia.
That's the scope of it. I think I'm really trying, but one thing I found really wonderful was the way we partnered with the games development company that we chose in the end. We went through a massive games pitching session and big game studio names on the list, and because I've never worked in an agency the size of Saatchi, I just assumed that they'd be wanting to go with one of the big players. The ones who won it were these, you saw them in the video, there's like this tiny game studio based out in Hoxton, and there's 4 of them. 2 who rocked up to the pitch, they looked the combined age of 12, and they had stamps like the ones you see on the video, and they were just fizzing with creativity. When they walked out the room, everyone just turned to each other like, those are our guys, because they're actually going to guide us on how to make this game work within quite a dry science realm, which they did beautifully across the course of the whole thing. And I'll just briefly show you some of the VR, so you can see how it works in that space. Because I think what was interesting is that it was a mobile game, there's still an element to which that sense of navigation was slightly constrained, whereas now the VR version of it is what we're going to be using in the clinical trials. Whole series of activities you go through, and the results were phenomenal. So I think this will be old hand now, but it was like 63 years worth of time gathered for the sheer volume that, because every bit point of data within the game is captured, and they did the distillation of the results, and it was like 9,400 years it would have taken of the lab-based research to get the level of data that they were able to. So it's unbelievable. So just that you can sort of see where this area is just going to explode, isn't it, in terms of health and tech. And then lastly, just around story, because that's obviously what I'm really passionate about. Because we knew you couldn't do what you would normally do within a game, which is tell a really rich story, hide Easter eggs, plant narrative, you couldn't do that because it would invalidate the data if people were starting to sort of veer off to find things. So we had to weight the story as the promotional campaign that landed, which was the way people were led into the game. So we worked with an animation studio in Paris, got a little 2-minute piece to show you, and it just literally plants you in the world of the storytelling that then leads on into the game itself.
There was once a boy who lived by the sea. His father was a brave explorer. In faraway seas, they found incredible creatures and captured them, not with a hook, but with a pen. They voyaged together until his father grew old. And then, one by one, his memories were lost, washed away by time and tide. The boy was now a man, and it was his turn to captain the ship. So he set out once again to find their old friends and bring them back to his beloved sea hero. Just like the boy who saved his father's memories, now you can save the memories of the future. Play Sea Heroes, the world's first mobile game where anyone can help scientists find dimensions.
Stupid game tonight.
Yeah, Ramsey Bolton. I couldn't listen to this without just feeling really terrified. Okay, he's a lovely human being. And so this was just my last point, which is what I am really obsessed with, and what I think probably doesn't get done enough, particularly in the area I work, which is treating every single platform the way you should and understanding why people use the platform. So why you want to tell a story on Snapchat is going to look different to why you tell it on Instagram stories or how you tell it on any other kind of platform. So always starting with the story is where I committed from. That's me.